Hello. On behalf of the Public Theater and Public Forum, welcome to Creative Activism, a day of art, ideas, and action. My name is Brian Joseph Lee. I am the Director of Public Forum, and I'm thrilled to be your guide today. For Creative Activism, we have curated a series of workshops, conversations, panel discussions, and interviews, all designed to help you find creative solutions to the problems in your world. Now, before we go any further, I want to acknowledge the ground on which the Public Theater stands, and the grounds that I'm calling in from today, the unceded territory of the Lenape people, and what is now known as Manhattan. We acknowledge the original caretakers of this land and honor ancestors past, present, and emerging. If you're curious about the native lands on which you stand, you can visit native-lands.ca to learn more. Grounding is so important. So let's take a moment to ground ourselves today. Today is Wednesday, September 23rd. The year is 2020. We are less than 6 weeks away from the 2020 presidential elections. Yesterday, the official US death toll from COVID-19 surpassed 200,000. We've lost family members, heroes, leaders, icons. And all of this on the backdrop of national uprisings against racial injustice and a movement that advocates for the sanctity of Black life. And all of that as we are 6 weeks away from the most polarized and contentious presidential elections in modern American history. It's a lot. In listening to you, our community, the one question we heard echoed again and again is, what can we do? Well, here at the Public Theater, we believe in a theater made of, by, and for all people. Within that mission statement is the broadest invitation possible to welcome, include, engage, and uplift the voices of our city, our community, our nation, and our world. So today we're going to take our lead from the Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, trans, and disabled voices who have been organizing in the face of injustice for quite some time. Creative activism isn't about total agreement. We don't have to look the same, identify the same way, or even have the same tactics when it comes to change making. But we can move in alignment and work across difference to build change. We can reduce harm and protect those most vulnerable among us. We can educate ourselves and learn from our ancestors and elders whose struggles have paved the way for us to be present today. We can link arms with our siblings across the country and galvanize ourselves for the road ahead, because none of us knows exactly where this road will end, but I can tell you that the only way we're going to get there is together. Today, you will hear how to define your political home outside of the cycle of electoral politics by listening to a trio of Black, queer, feminists, artists, and activists. We will hear from organizations like For Freedoms, an artist collective that is building a political movement based in creativity, protest, and direct action. We'll speak to experts from the Brennan Center for Justice who will cut through the disinformation and lies that may impact the 2020 election. And we'll have time to sit down with some of the most groundbreaking artists of our generation. We hope that creative activism lends you the inspiration, tools, and resources you need to make change in your world. So with that, I'm excited to start our first session, Finding Our Political Home with Erika Dickerson-Despenza and Cara Page. But first, an invocation on today's work by artist, activist, and organizer, Lady Dane Figueroa Edidi.
Thank you so much, sibling. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Lady Dane Figueroa Edidi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm calling from what is known as DC, but we understand that it is the land of the Piscataway peoples. I want to thank the indigenous spirits of this land. An invocation. Thank you, ancestors, for leading us. Thank you for being a part of this important work we have been called upon to do. Thank you. An invocation is a call to action. An invocation is an act of acknowledging an act of calling, an act of relationship, an act of something deep, old, ancient, remembered, and recalled. Here in this place of sun and theater, of holy ground and mystic walks, of imagination and make-believe come to reality, we know upon the things with which we call. We call upon the things that we know are sacredly in right relationship with us. These are things that can't be found in performative allyship. These are things that can't be brought or sold. These are things that shackle cannot bind and whip cannot bleed. And the sacredness of our lineage are the tools our ancestors placed there, are the stories and truths of our power and magic and mystery and holiness. And the sacredness of our Blackness are the hymns that moved heavens to dance, and the shouts that forced mountains to land at our feet. We, my people, are the dreams of our ancestors come to life, are the knowing of a joy imagined, and a rage that can burn down oppressive structures. We, my people, are an earthly manifestation of God. And I cry freedom. And I cry liberation and power. Acknowledge your power. Acknowledge our power. Power. Black liberation, Indigenous liberation, trans liberation, true liberation, our liberation, real liberation, sacred liberation, the holiest of holies, liberation, holy. Liberation that destroys oppressive forces. Liberation that calls forth Black joy into being. Liberation that goes beyond the wildest imaginations. Liberation that we have always known was possible. Power. That is what we invoke now. Here and tomorrow. Black liberation, Indigenous liberation, trans liberation, my liberation, your liberation, our liberation. So that we can all finally know the joy of what it means to breathe without fear, without abuse, without impunity, without violence, without terror, without shame, so that we can thrive, not simply survive, so that we can live. Liberation, we call to you. Black liberation, we call to you. Indigenous liberation, we call to you. Trans liberation, we call to you, to this land, to these waters, to these places, to these buildings, to these things, to this world, to these relationships. The Spirit asks, what will you do? What will you do? What will you do for this liberation? Ashe.
I am super excited to be in conversation with Cara Page and my sister, Lady Dane. It is always a pleasure to gather with other Black queer women who are doing work across the board. And so I want to start by asking you, who are your people in the Ella Baker tradition? Or as Auntie Toni K. Bambara would say, who are the communities who name you?
I'll jump in. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the question. I live in the words of Ella Baker and Toni K. Bambara. I'm the great-granddaughter of Black Seminole migrant sharecroppers. My people are Black folks, people of mixed descent, Black Southern folk who migrated north, BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color liberation organizers, healers, LGBTQ, GNC, and intersex, disability justice, healing justice, transformative justice organizers, memory workers, abolitionists, witches, curanderas, Afrofuturists, shamans, and map makers, creating a new path for liberation.
You better get it. I got some chills, child. I was
gonna behave. I was gonna behave.
I said, all right. Okay. Oh my goodness. So many, right? Like so many peoples, Black people, Indigenous people, Latinx people, immigrants, Nigerian people. Hey, y'all. Women, Black Indigenous peoples, witches, shamans, priestesses, those who hid the mysteries in our DNA so that we may still manifest them now. Ancestors, oh goodness, the first mothers, the first gods. The indigenous spirits of this land of Africa, of those who chose to jump into the embrace of Mama Yamaya. Oh my goodness, the people who are now deeply invested in liberation, the people who are now deeply invested in indigenous sovereignty, you all. That's just a few.
Y'all are so beautiful, and I'm glad Lady Dane just gave me permission to cut up, because I was gonna behave. But you have ushered in the spirit of cut up, and I am grateful, sis. My people are Sicilian immigrants who came to this land by way of New Orleans. My people are Afro-Creole women who refused to pass and open the first air-conditioned jazz club and hotel for Black people in New Orleans. My people are Hurricane Katrina survivors. My people are from the west side of Chicago and take no shit. We are never the one. My people are Black women and Indigenous women in both of those cities. My people are queer, my people are trans, my people can never be boxed in. My people are Ella Baker and Miss Major and Harriet Tubman and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. My people are Toni K. Bambara and Saki Shange. My people are all of the people working for the complete and utter destruction of all systems of violence and the building of liberated futures for all people, particularly Black women, girls, femmes, and non-binary people, because we know when Black women and girls get free, everyone gets free. So those are my people. Those are the folks I am accountable to. Those are the people who are on my shoulder, have their gun at my back, and who are in my ear at all times. And it is a pleasure to usher their presence into the room, their wisdom into the space, this digital space that we are creating, to talk about what it means to find a political home, remain in political community, not just as organizers, but as artists and culture workers as well. And so I want to start there. What is a political home? How would you all define a political home, and where or with whom is your political home? Lady D.
Oh my goodness, I think when I think about a political home, I think about a place where you can share ideas of liberation, a place that is invested in liberation completely, right? A place that understands that a feast is not made of crumbs. A place where I can go and feel fully affirmed, a place where I can feel loved, where I can feel honored, a place that is truly, 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 I said this earlier, invested in liberation. And then what? Did I have another question? Wait, did I answer the question?
Where's your political home?
Where is mine? Oh, you know what? I guess I would say that like my political home is in those true and loving and affirming relationships with family of spirit and those of choice, right? Those of spirit, choice, and blood, meaning when I say those of blood, I mean those who are in right relationship with me, who are invested in my liberation, right? Um, yeah, that's where I find particularly my political home. Um, we can have a conversation about whether institutions, whether or not you can have a political home in an institution or not. I guess that's a question for later. But so I choose to find that political home actually in the relationships, right? Um, that I build with folks around collective um, and interpersonal and individual liberation.
I'm going to riff with you. Thank you so much, Lady Dane. I think a political home is a place where I feel safe, where I feel transformed, or that I can be transformed, or we can be transformed together. It is spiritual, as you were saying, and a place of creation and vulnerability, love and grace. It does, for me, have to center a Black feminist lens, or maybe a anti-capitalist lens, queer, trans lens. But more than that, it's like a multi-gendered, multi-bodied, multi-ability space that allows for a different ways of being that can be abstract and are not confined, by supremacy, all types of supremacy and colonization, but that is actually, my political home is a place where we can imagine ourselves beyond borders and see ourselves in relationship to land and body and spirit in ways we've never imagined. So there's got to be creation and imagination, and of course liberation. Like, what does it mean to be freedom fighters? To me, a political home allows for that embodiment of collective care, collective safety, collective freedom.
I would say for me, right, my political home, which I think that all three of us are really bringing up and highlighting the fact that it's not so much about place, it's about people, it's about relationship. And we're going to talk more about that as we talk about the differences between like activism and organizing, right? One is a very interpersonal relationship building centered, and one can be very individualistic and non-accountable to other people. So for me, I see a political home as the group of people formally organized or informally organized, with whom I am in a deep community, committed to principled struggle, engaging in rigorous political education, and I am accountable to them and they are accountable to me. As we work together to, do actions, create campaigns, build political power through political strategy, and to win. I would say the feeling of a political home for me is a juke joint. And I'm very specific about that because when we think about juke coming from a root word that means disorderly, right, against the norms, that for me is what a radical political home that is deeply invested in the liberation of Black women and girls and femmes and non-binary people, trans people, like, because that is my center. And from that center, I am also like trying to become and wanting to be in deeper community with folks from other movements and folks from other identities, because I believe in deep solidarity and my political homes must be invested in deep solidarity, right? Transnational solidarity, which Dr. Angela Davis always calls us to and calls us in, right, around. But it feels like a juke joint, that there's heat and there is energetic movement and there is music and there is love and sometimes there is harm, but we work to eradicate it. We work to do some transformative, conflict transformation, healing, justice. We are doing all of that, but it is disorderly because the work that we are engaged in is disorderly work that cannot be met with niceness, that cannot be met with manners, that cannot be met with anything less than what is required to destroy the systems that continue to oppress us and to build the world and practice with each other, right? That for me is the accountability and the commitment to principled struggle is that we're practicing this world that we are building at the same time, and we're getting it wrong, but we're committed to each other, so we stay and figure it out. And so I'm thinking about a juke joint in that manner as well, that is built for the people, by the people, for our pleasure, and also for other purposes. Yeah. I want to give folks an opportunity to say anything that might have come up for you as we listen to each other before we move on to the next question.
I love that, one, I started dancing. I was like, yes, honey, a juke joint. Ow! Because I also, when I think about a juke joint, I think about a place where art and pleasure and what is so essential and necessary and deep is prioritized over an idea of civility, right? Or over an idea of respectability politics, or over an idea of trying to fit into a box of what white supremacy says we're supposed to be, right? It is a place where the freedoms of Black peoples are allowed to flourish without judgment and or threats of pain. And so, yeah, and I think about healing, right? I think about the necessary, the root of so much of what I think about when I think about political work, or I think about a political home, right, is that at the root of that is this commitment to healing, not as the illusion of, oh, you just go and you get healed once, right, but as a continual process in which we are continually deeply committed to that healing every day, every second, every hour. And within that healing is also the principle of accountability. Because accountability for a communal type of engagement, for a community type of engagement, allows for transformation. It gives us a roadmap how to move through when we don't get it right. And so those are some things that came up for me as you were talking, and I felt the spirit dancing. It was like tapping into an ancestral memory space. You know what I'm saying?
I love a juke joint. So thank you for bringing that prayer, psalm, energy, life force into the space. I love a juke joint. I love a chitlin circuit, all the things we did to create, right, a spaces for Black folks to be in our bodies and to embody desire, and to take what was seen as sinful and wrong and dangerous and make it sacred. And I think that is the power of transformation and Black people in our liberation practice, is taking what it was seeing people seeing as ugly and perceived as less than human, and turning that back and being more powerful, more full of transformation or magic, Black magic. And and to be able to welcome ourselves home. I do think a juke joint was about home and centered belonging inside of music, desire, energy, life force, healing. Thank you, Lady Dane, and struggle. Like you said, nobody is left out, nobody is tossed, nobody is expendable for being a little bit fiery or whatever, getting into a tussle, that they're gonna come back the next day. You know what I mean? We all can hold each other's mess with grace and respect and dignity and care. So I'm all for it.
Yes, and I just want to shout out two of my primary political homes, the Let Us Breathe Collective, which is an alliance of artists and activists organizing through a creative lens in Chicago to imagine a world without police. Also want to shout out BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100, young people between the ages of 18 and 35 who are building political power using a Black queer feminist lens. Shout out to the home team Chicago, first, foremost, and always, because those are my people. Also want to shout out Asada's Daughters, the entire alliance of organizations that I was politicized and radicalized through back home in Chicago. And much love to all of the other chapters of affiliated organizations as well. But those are two to three of my primary political homes. And then, you know, there are individuals who I have found home in and who we do life with. And so that's something that I wanted to, you know, bring up as artists, right? Black queer women who are artists, organizers, activists, healers, ministers, working through a range of modalities and genres of work and artistic practices. What might established political homes in terms of like grassroots organizations, what might artists have to offer these kind of established political homes? Because I think that sometimes in organizing spaces that are filled with folks who do not come from creative backgrounds or do not employ the creativity that they inherently have, that sometimes there's a missed opportunity, right? Like I think about the Black Panther Party and how important the illustrations of the pamphlets were. I think about how most of us are politicized first and foremost, even when we don't recognize it, through some sort of art, right? And then we might have popular education in the world of technology, right? We have these like infographics and things like that that might, you know, hint at something that we had already seen or come in contact with via visual media or a visual art piece or performance. So what might artists have to offer established political homes, and what might we gain from being a part of political homes? What do y'all think?
I would say, I know I was like, let me shout out the Black Transparent book. Hey, y'all. Hey, J. Mesa III. I think that the thing about art, right, is that art is deeply spiritual. And I think that the roots of art, right, go all the way back to our first rituals and our first celebrations and attempts to understand our relationship, not only to the gods, right, not only to the land or the elements, right, but also to each other. And so I think about the deeply necessary role that storytelling plays in the forming of the ways in which we experience not only ourselves, but relationship with each other. And when I think about artists, I think that part of the artist's great gift is to help imagine new worlds. Art activates within each person who partakes in it, whether you are a spectator or you are the one who are allowing the spirits to flow through you. You are having your imagination activated. And so to me, for example, when we say, what could a world look like without police? You will have some folks who are politicians, some folks who are who don't identify as artists say, well, I don't know, I just know that we're not supposed to have the police no more, right? But what the artist does, right, is the artist says, well, what does that world, what is the experience of that world? They go into their deep gifts, and then they actually present what it could be like. And so that is one of the deep gifts of the artist, is that they help us to be able to make tangible the principles, the thoughts, the theories, and even some of the proxies that we haven't quite figured out. They help to make tangible those things for us, because the artist is a part of a deep spiritual legacy of storytelling, which finds its roots in ritual and spirituality all the way back in Africa.
I thank you so much for bringing that piece, Lady Dane, especially around ritual, right? And for me, I always say that I'm a culture worker and a memory worker, and that rooted in deep lineage of Black radical Southern tradition, I think, of how we take the bones of memory and recreate a new world, a new place of being. Like literally, we are, as artists and cultural workers, like conduits and conjurers of disgusting, horrible truth of what has been done to us, on us, without us, and we take sexual violence, anti-Black violence, anti-trans violence, ableist violence, and we say we are powerful, we are here, we are building truth and still existing. And I do think that is the ritual and the creating memorials. I do a lot of altars, building altars that honor those stories that are hidden, like hidden truths and stories of resilience, of power, of strength, that have pushed back against impossibleness, impossibility, so that we can imagine something else, right? And to see culture workers reimagine, defunding the police, defunding the prison industrial complex, defunding the medical industrial complex, just turning it all upside down, that cultural workers have this way of seeing, well, then without all of that, throwing it all up in the air, what have we been and what can we become? And really weaving and vibrationally changing. My project that I call my work inside of it is called Changing Frequencies. I literally believe we have the potential as Black and brown, queer and trans, gender non-binary, women and girls, incarcerated, detained folk. We have the potential to take something and change these systems that have been embodied on a genetic cellular level and move it up and out and imagine to change. What does it mean to change frequency? To change these frequencies that have held us down, kept us quiet, silenced us, killed us, and say, no, we're gonna change this because we are multi-dimensional people living on multi-planes, connected to ancestors and connected to the future. And so then creation becomes technology. It becomes our pathway to how we will get to the next destination, because we have come so far despite all the things they have tried to do to us.
In the Let Us Breathe collective, we say artists are the vanguard of the revolution. And we really believe that. And so what I will say, right, is for me, the artist shows us where our holes are in our theory and our praxis, that we illuminate the work that we may not be tending to, in addition to providing more imaginative futures, more liberated, imaginative futures, more possibility for what that can look like. And so in my own work, like I'm writing this template Katrina cycle that's focused on the effects of Hurricane Katrina and the man-made state-sanctioned flood in New Orleans and beyond, right? Thinking about the Katrina diaspora, thinking about all of the narratives that have been left out, and mostly thinking about water as this powerful, life-giving and life-taking force, and thinking about Black women's relationship to water from the Middle Passage to this moment. And so when I'm writing that body of work, and even the body of work around Flint, I am also, as an organizer and cultural worker, going back to my political homes and saying, okay, great. We are so about police and prison abolition. Now, about these abolitionist political ecologies, though, right? Because it is all connected. And what is our work around creating and teaching and really being invested in abolitionist political ecologies? Because water, right? And when I think about water and oceans, I'm taken to Christina Sharp and Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who remind us how long sound stays in water, hundreds, thousands of years. And so whatever sound was made of our foremothers who jumped ship and said, I would rather leave this way than to be enslaved. Whatever sound that was put there is still there. What is our work around that? What is our work around water, around healing, cultural memory, right? And so Cara is actually the reason why in my bio it now says like abolitionist cultural memory worker, because cultural memory, separately cultural memory, but also like cultural memory, but cultural memory together, thinking about how Toni Morrison reminded us of cultural memory and Beloved, right? Like that became so clear to me as being a central part of my work. And so when I think about, what artists have to gain from political homes, it is, okay, great, we have imagined this thing and we can see the future. We've designed it, we wrote it, we put it in an installation, we've drawn it, we've collaged it, we sang it, whatever. How do we do it? Right. And it has us meet our imagination with the very practical on the ground work, if we choose to take up that mantle, right? And so I think about people like Lorraine Hansberry, who, yes, we know wrote plays, right? But like, who was also in college at my alma mater, actually, a part of the Young Progressives of America, a part of the Labor Youth League, right? When she moved to New York, she was at the Jefferson School having political education, right? Like she was writing for the Freedom Paper, that it was never just, I'm gonna just make my art over here and the art is the ends and the means. It was like, no, this is a tool for politicizing and radicalizing people around, right, if we're thinking about Raising in the Sun, around housing injustice. And so I'm gonna use that tool to politicize and radicalize. But I'm also doing other work and I'm plugging in on the ground. And so I think that political homes, when we are really connected, challenge us to move beyond considering our art as the end. And that I think is a challenge right now for those of us who might be very comfortable being like, well, I wrote about the topic, I danced about the topic, I did an art installation on the topic, and that's cool. Like, that's great. That is cool. We are thankful for your contribution, but how does that materialize, right? What is the work of your work? Which is what, again, Toni K. Bambara always calls us to. And so that's what I'm thinking about as we are, in this era. What is the work of our work as artists and as cultural workers and cultural memory workers in this time?
Yeah, I think about, right, it's like, I think about my aunt Liz, who was a jazz singer, who was I call her, she was an artist, an activist, and an academic. And that all of those things she taught to me, right? She would put books in front of me about history that she knew I wouldn't learn in school, because she knew it was important. And I think about people like Abby Lincoln, right? Who wrote Who Will Revere the Black Woman, who was an academic and an artist and who was doing political work. I think about Nina Simone, who says the artist must reflect the times, and that these artists were not. And I think about Aida Walker, right? Like all the way back in the 1920s, who was saying Black women are beautiful and we have the right to engage in art however we want to. And had her own troupe. Go on, Aida Walker, mama. And so for myself, yeah, I thank y'all both for saying that, because I think that in the spirit of, the ancestors, the artists did not exist separate of the organizers, right? Like everybody was together at the house talking about what we're going to do. So Nina, you go ahead and you write a song about it. Right. I'm going to go march. You do this and you do this. Right. And so even as we talk about community and what a cooperative model could look like, that is based in the ways in which our ancestors worked and they functioned and they got things done. And so, yes, I definitely affirm that the artist does not exist separate from, it is impossible to, because when I walk into a space, I am all of who I am. And art is the gift that the ancestors and the gods gave to me to be able to navigate, right? Knowing myself and also relationship with the world and others, and to heal and to hold accountable, et cetera, et cetera. But it is impossible, I think, to create the art without also understanding that you still Black, you still trans, you're still, you're still indigenous, you're still the daughter of an immigrant, you're still all of these things, no matter where you're at. So whether I am at the public theater or at a theater in DC or in my house or at my grocery store, I am all of me all the time. And it is impossible for me to separate my my artistic work from the needs of my people. It is impossible to do those things. And to think that just because I wrote Clytemnestra, I've done enough. No, you ain't. People still hungry, people still, there is still so much more work to do. So yeah, I just wanted to say that too in the space as well. I thank y'all both.
I thank you both so much for what you're naming. I want to toss Harriet Tubman into the mix here too. And right, because this idea of cultural work also extends to healers, right? And that this idea that healing is somehow outside of liberation work is a lie. It's just not true. And we could track, right? We're healers and cultural workers, like you're saying, Lady Dane, and Erika, like integral, that cultural work and healing work is integral to our political, spiritual survival, and that cultural work knows no bounds, like how we embody pain and grief and generational trauma from slavery and colonization is the same embodiment of pleasure and eroticism and desire of what we can, how do you change that pain into power and into pleasure? And I want to give a shout out to Ndizaki Shange and Ebony Noel Golden, Alexis Gums, Charmaline, Elizabeth Catlett, who's an amazing sculptor who changed space and time with her sculptures ahead of her time, starting in the 1950s, doing metal sculpture and changing literal public space and claiming it. And Elizabeth Scott, who I don't think a lot of people know, the mother of Joyce Scott, right? Joyce Scott is a phenomenal bead, amazing transformative artist who did this amazing beaded work of a lynched Black man above the Thinker at the Baltimore Art Museum in the 90s. And that she was given a whole space at the Art Museum of Baltimore to say, how do I navigate white supremacy in the halls of your museums that have curated our lives into small boxes and been about mistruths and exoticization of Black bodies? And she turned it on its head and put above the white thinker, I'm thinking about lynching this Black man who's above my head. Like that kind of transformation of space. Elizabeth Scott, famous quilt maker, who was seen as a witch and was casted out by other quilters because she was putting in shells and coins and stones and medicine in the quilts. What is that? That's the lineage of the Underground Railroad. What is the message? What are the intonations? What's the invocation, Lady Dane, that we are calling out in our creative pieces that is much bigger than the actual action of it, but what vibration it leaves behind? And that is the work of artists and cultural workers that is much bigger than ourselves, but also energetically, what are we shifting? Like, I'm doing site-specific installations on grounds where there was experimentation of Black people, looking at the medical industrial complex, like working with something like a mental state hospital that took disabled people and turned them into bodies as objects. Black and brown in the South in the 50s to 2010, and now it's a prison, testing and experimenting on bodies for the therapeutic world to build industry. to go to that space, the Central Milledgeville State Hospital, and to do a testimonial and an installation on that ground, because I want to honor everyone who died there. I want to honor everyone who was imprisoned there, and to say we will never let this happen again. We will not leave you behind. That is the power of cultural work that transforms us.
Thank you so much for bringing the medical industrial complex into the mix, because as we talk about systems that need to be abolished, right? Prison and police, and police is a violence. So I just feel like saying, we've just said that 3 times actually, right? That is such a heavy focus, as it should be, but we mustn't forget, right? The medical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, right? All the shit has to burn, right? We have so much to build in its place. And so I love that. And I've always loved that about your work, that you bring into focus the medical industrial complex. And thank you for that, and clarifying what our work is as cultural workers and artists beyond creating the piece. I'm gonna lift this up because it is a quote that is always misrepresented, that like really grinds my gears. In the 1982 interview with Kate Benetti, Toni K. Bambara is asked, what do you view as the function of the artist? And her actual response was, the task of the artist is determined always by the status and process and agenda of the community that it already serves. And then later she goes on to say, as a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. That has gotten twisted in a whole lot of ways over the years, but I bring this up to say, right, like, if I am a cultural worker and the community that names me is the status quo, then my job is to uphold the status quo. But if I am from oppressed groups, right, and I am actually saying that my people are free in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, who said that in the middle of slavery, if I am actively working toward that kind of radical liberation, then my job is to shake shit up and to risk it all, right? And so what are we risking in this time? What are we willing to risk? And so our last question of our brief time together is this, right? We are in an election year where the options are between 2 white men who are perpetrators of sexual violence, one who is a fascist and one who is an architect of carceral geography. Should the Democratic ticket win, it means that we will be under a carceral neoliberal leadership, which is no less violent, but is a different kind or shade of violence than what we are currently experiencing. And so as artists and cultural workers who are also organizers and activists, what is our work now and beyond the election, right? Because many of our community members are saying vote, which also is not an organizing method. Yelling vote at people does not make them vote. It does not address things that inhibit people from being able to vote. So I encourage folks who are serious about electoral politics, and maybe that's your thing. We need people in every area of the work. Kudos, power to you. But that is not an organizing strategy, yelling at people on social media, okay? Let's actually have an organized way of encouraging people to exercise their right. But what is our work in this time? How are we making revolution irresistible beyond the outcome of who is gonna run the empire? Because whoever runs it won't free us, right? What's our work in this time, y'all?
So I'll say, also it's like vote with no kind of analysis, right? Like it's like, ain't nobody, it's like, you're not gonna talk about like local politics. You're not gonna talk about the fact that like, maybe you need to flip the Senate if you wanna really fight for legislation that you believe should get passed. Maybe you need to be talking about, oh my goodness, child. Listen, so let me just say this, let me preface it with this. Yes, I'm going to vote. Yes, I'm going to vote for Biden, right? Like, okay, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So before anybody starts out there, do I believe that our salvation rests in the system? Absolutely not. We could see from a Black president who literally felt and perpetuated helplessness, even though he had held the the highest, what they call the highest, right, and most powerful structurally office in the entire world. So let me start there first. I have a status that I was gonna make when Justice Ginsburg Ginsburg passed. I said, justice does not rest in one judge, right? Justice is the power of us all. We all actually have the power to call for, to hold accountable these systems and to also abolish them completely. There was a world before colonization. There will be a world after colonization. My role in this moment, right, is to demand from everyone, no matter who you are, to be invested in liberation, period, completely and utterly and totally. Because even if Biden wins, the work that needs to be done is really, 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 we're asking to dismantle systems that were starting to be in place before 1619. So I will say that it is to call for a liberation politic as opposed to a respectability one.
I really, I know the time is running short. This is a beautiful question. I'm just gonna call out and say the Salt Eaters of Tony K. Mabara talks a lot about what does it mean to be well, right? And it's really my Bible, the Salt Eaters. I tell everyone this. And I think that's such a powerful question. And she says, because to be well takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of struggle to say, I will be well. No matter how we define that for our people, for our communities, for our lives, as an artist, as a culture worker, as agitators and strategists and conjurers and memory workers, I truly believe we have to heal all paradigms. And so I am putting a call out to other cultural workers. We need to be as public and out with our things as possible. Like, not wait for the funding to do it. Like, get to the block and call out the story that you need to tell, or go to the land that you know there have been lynchings, there have been rapes, there have been killings of our peoples, of our communities, and take that shit back. Like, what does reclamation look like when we literally place our bodies on the line? And as organizers and culture workers, I truly believe that is our role, that we are literally sacred ground, and that we in of ourselves, if we can transform the spaces that we are engaging with, and it will transform us. And so I know this is a big question about system change work, but I believe that's part of our work.
Yes, the work is what the work has always been, no matter who runs the empire. It just depends on what we have to turn our lens toward, given the violences that whoever runs the empire is bringing, right? And who inflicts more oppression of a specific kind on our communities. I love that you brought up the Salt Eaters as we close. Tony K. Bambara has explicitly in interviews communicated that she wrote that book for grassroots organizers to bring together organizers and healers. And yet I know very few organizers, and I know a lot of organizers across the country, but I know very few who've actually read that text. In this time, as we are gravitating toward Octavia Butler, as we should, we also need to be reading the Salt Eaters. Because at the end of that text, what the healer, Miss Minnie, asks is, now that you are well, or when you are well, what will you do when you are whole? And that is the question that we should also be asking. Not just do we want to be well, and what does wellness look like? How are we visioning it for our communities? But what will we do when we are well? And how are we practicing being well right now in our relationships to and with each other, in our work and the work of our work? And how are we prepared to seriously risk, as artists, with contracts and deals and shows and Broadway, which should also be abolished? What are we willing to risk for our liberation, like really and truly? And how can we get in deep community with folks who are in alignment with our vision of liberation, right? Who know more than us, who can teach us, who will hold us accountable, right? That's kind of the difference, one of the differences between being an activist and an organizer, right? An activist, you can sign a petition, you can send an email, you can take an action on behalf of something you believe in, but you're actually not really accountable to anyone, right? You don't have anyone around you saying, you have forgotten this community, or that decision you made is actually out of alignment with the larger goal for our people's liberation. But when you are in deep community with folks with whom you are in consistent struggle and accountable to, and who are accountable to you, it's a different level of engagement. It's actually relational. And we can't get free without relationships. We can't get free without community and principled struggle. And we can only have principled struggle if we are in community with people. We can only have liberation if we are truly willing to risk the comfort and the privileges that we carry in our respective ways for the greater liberation of all of us. When Black women get free, everybody gets free. And so let's do that. Let's do that. I hope that you will plug into whatever political homes are compatible with your vision of liberation wherever you are. There's always somebody doing the work. Whatever issue it is that you care about, whatever you're interested in being involved in, there are people doing that work already. Please find them. There are so many different ways to get plugged in. The Movement for Black Lives just had an amazing conference that I think the link is still available to that, and to get plugged in with other activists and organizers across the nation to figure out like, oh, who's doing what work and how can I be down? There are so many organizations in New York alone. If you are watching us within the city of New York, find your people. Know who your people are. Get some people if you don't have no people. But we need everybody. So this is not an elite group of activists or organizers who are specially trained and programmed and are the only people who can do this work. We need all of us to get free. And so I hope that you will consider finding a political home if you don't have one, being more robustly engaged in the political home that you do have, and finding your people. Thank you so much for joining us for this segment. We are happy to be opening creative activism, and y'all be well and decide what you will do with your wellness.
Gorgeous. Deeply honored. Thank you. To conjure with you both.
Jay, thank you. Yes, it was a blessing. Love y'all.
Love y'all.
Love y'all. Power. All right.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you, Cara. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Dane. I'm realizing one of the limitations of the Zoom space is that you can't hear me cheering at every given moment of that conversation. So revelatory. The way that we were talking about being well versus being whole. What are you prepared to risk for your own liberation? Building community and relationship, finding your people, and of course, when Black women get free, we all get free. Remember some of those notes. Erika, thank you for pointing people to resources and to do your own research to find your people. They're out there. Up next, the urgency for a new world has sounded the call, and we are all we need to build the future that we've been waiting for. So our next session is going to be hosted by Four Freedoms as they host Wide Awake, Art and the Future of Justice. That'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Stay tuned, everybody.